All right, ready for today's deep dive. We're going to tackle something I think a lot of us struggle with. That gap between knowing what we should be doing and then like actually doing it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The classic intention-action gap happens all the time. And a lot of times, I think fear is a big part of that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about fear. I mean, we've all felt it, right? Like that, oh, I almost tripped feeling, or, heart racing before a big presentation. But the expert we're looking at today makes this really interesting distinction between primal fear and then intellectual fear.
Yeah, it's so important to know the difference. Primal fears are those like hardwired responses to immediate danger, like you said, almost tripping, or, coming face to face with a bear in the woods. Those reactions are there to keep us safe. But intellectual fears are a different story. Those are the fears we create in our minds, like the fear of failure, rejection, judgment, that kind of thing.
Okay, so like my brain is telling me that asking for a raise is just as terrifying as running from a bear.
Yeah.
Even though realistically my boss is not going to like maul me.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Even though these intellectual fears are based on these like made up scenarios in our heads, our brains often trigger the same physical responses as if they were real, actual threats.
Whoa, wait a minute. So my body is reacting to my fear of getting laughed at as if it's a life or death situation. That's wild.
It is. And that's where that lion in the forest analogy comes in. The expert talks about how if you're walking through a forest and a lion jumps out, your body immediately floods with adrenaline, right? You're ready to fight or flee. But with these intellectual fears, those lions are often just thoughts we've conjured up, not actual threats.
Okay, that analogy makes a lot of sense. So it's like those late night worries where I'm playing out all the worst case scenarios, my heart's racing, I'm convinced everything's going to fall apart. But really, it's just my thoughts running wild.
Totally. And that's why understanding this distinction is so important. When we realize those fears are often self-generated, we can start to challenge them and regain our power.
So instead of letting those lions control me, I can learn to just pause, recognize that the threat isn't real, and then choose how I want to respond.
Exactly. The expert emphasizes that awareness is the first step. You got to notice those fear-based thoughts and see that they don't always reflect reality.
Okay, that makes sense, but it still feels tough. Like, just knowing that my fear of public speaking is mostly in my head doesn't magically make me less nervous, right?
Right. It's not a quick fix. But the expert talks about practice and repetition. Like, we can rewire those thought patterns with practice. It's like creating a new pathway in your brain. The more we challenge those fear-based thoughts and choose a different response, the weaker those old pathways become.
So it's not about getting rid of fear entirely, it's more like learning to manage it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And a big part of that is understanding the power of why. The expert says when we have a strong why, a powerful motivation, then fear becomes less of an obstacle.
This is where it gets really interesting, right? The expert tells this story about a coaching client who at first just said he wanted to make $100,000. But as they talked more, his real why came out. It was about protecting his family, building a legacy.
Right. And that shift from a surface level goal to a deeper why totally changed his perspective and his actions. He wasn't just chasing a number anymore. He was driven by something way more meaningful.
It's not just about setting goals, it's about connecting with that deeper motivation.
Right.
But how do you figure out your why, especially if it's not super obvious?
That is the question. The expert suggests spending some time in self-reflection. Like, really ask yourself, what truly matters to me? What kind of impact do I want to make? What brings me joy?
So it's like you're going in reverse. You're starting with why, and then the how becomes more clear.
Exactly. The expert is all about this idea that when your why is strong enough, the how will often show itself. The steps you need to take, the resources you need, they become more clear because you're driven by something deeper than just like fleeting motivation.
I'm starting to see how this all fits together. But let's talk about procrastination for a sec. A lot of us put things off even when we know they're important. Did the expert have anything to say about that?
Oh, absolutely. They use this powerful analogy. Imagine your house is on fire and you have to get your family out. No time for procrastination, all right? The urgency of the situation takes over, overrides any fear or hesitation.
Wow, that's a pretty intense image. So are they saying we need to create that same level of urgency for all our goals?
Not necessarily. The point is that when our why is really compelling, when we connect with that deeper meaning behind what we're doing, we tap into a motivation that can help us overcome procrastination.
So it's all about finding that place where your goals are aligned with your values and what you really want deep down. But what about those times when fear still pops up, even when you know your why?
Totally normal. The expert actually talks about their own experience leaving a stable job to follow their passion, even though it was scary. And it was a message from their late father about embracing courage, love, and laughter that really pushed them to commit.
That's a powerful story. It shows that even really successful people deal with fear. It's about making the choice to move forward anyway.
And that's where the real growth is, right? When we step out of our comfort zones, challenge our limiting beliefs, and take action even when we're not sure what's going to happen.
So we've talked about fear, the power of why, and how strong motivation can help us beat procrastination. But what about this idea that achieving our goals automatically makes us happy? Is that always true?
That's a great question. It takes us to another big idea from the expert. They talk about this feeling of emptiness. They actually call it a void that a lot of people experience even when they achieve outward success.
Like that saying, money can't buy happiness. Right. But what does fill that void? What does the expert say about finding real fulfillment?
That's what we'll dig into in the next part of our deep dive. They talk about the importance of finding peace and silence, accepting every part of ourselves, and starting a deeper journey of self-discovery.
Okay, I'm definitely interested. We've already covered so much, but I can't wait to hear what they have to say about finding that deeper sense of peace and fulfillment. Stay tuned because this deep dive is about to get even more insightful.
It's kind of crazy how we chase all this external stuff, the big job title, the fancy house, tons of money, thinking that's what will make us happy.
Yeah, like we're told more is always better, and then we get there, we achieve those things, but we still feel kind of empty, like something's missing. The expert uses this word void to describe it.
Right, and they talk about how they felt that way too. Even after achieving financial success, they were working from home, making good money, but still felt like something was off, like they were kind of withering away.
So even with all the outward signs of success, there was still that feeling of something missing, that disconnect. What did the expert do about it?
Well, they didn't ignore it. They actually leaned into it. They started exploring what they were truly passionate about, things that really lit them up, like starting a podcast, coaching, using their skills to make a real difference.
So shifting the focus from achieving to contributing. But wasn't that risky? Leaving a stable job to pursue something uncertain.
Totally. It meant stepping into the unknown, facing those fears of failure and judgment we talked about. But they realized that the potential rewards were worth the risk, both personally and in terms of impact.
That's the power of why, again, right? When your motivation comes from something deeper than just money or status, it gives you the courage to go for it.
Absolutely. And speaking of courage, the expert talks about this incredible turning point in their journey, a message from their late father. That message encouraged them to embrace courage, love, and laughter. It was the push they needed to fully commit to this new path.
Wow, that's really beautiful. It shows how sometimes the most powerful guidance comes from unexpected places. But even with that inspiration, I'm sure there were still doubts. How did the expert deal with those inner critics?
They say those voices of self-doubt are always going to be there, but we don't have to let them control us. They talk about it as a process of choosing yourself, even when it's scary.
So, not about silencing those inner critics completely, but more about managing them, like turning down the volume on the negativity so you can focus on the positive.
That's a great way to put it. It's about acknowledging those doubts, but choosing to move forward anyway. The expert even said the fear of staying stuck, of not living up to their potential, was scarier than the fear of the unknown.
I think a lot of people can relate to that. Being at a crossroads, knowing you need to make a change, but feeling frozen by fear. What advice does the expert give for breaking free from that?
Self-awareness is key. Not just knowing your strengths, but also acknowledging the parts of yourself you might not love. And instead of trying to hide those parts, they say embrace them, embrace your wholeness, even the messy bits.
Like that saying, you can't outrun your shadow. Trying to ignore those parts of ourselves just makes them stronger.
Exactly. They actually compare it to an orchestra, with each instrument playing its part to create a harmonious whole. We're not meant to be perfect. Our complexities, our contradictions, they're what make us interesting and unique.
I love that analogy. It's about recognizing that we're all a mix of light and shadow, and both are important. How do we actually practice this self-acceptance? It sounds kind of hard.
The expert talks about seeking solace in silence, finding those quiet moments to connect with yourself on a deeper level. They even compare it to a polar bear shaking off trauma, like allowing yourself to release pent-up emotions and stress.
So creating space for stillness, just being rather than constantly doing and achieving. But in a world full of distractions, how do we actually find time for that?
That's where the expert's own experience is really helpful. They talk about setting boundaries with technology, being intentional about how you spend your time and energy. They actually even took a break from social media for a whole month to reclaim their time and attention.
Wow, that's a bold move. I don't know if
Yeah.
I could give up social media for that long. It sounds like it was really valuable, though.
It was. They talk about how it allowed them to connect with a deeper sense of peace and presence. And get this, they actually found that prioritizing stillness made them more creative and effective in other areas of their life.
That's so interesting. We often feel like we have to be on all the time to get things done. But the expert is saying slowing down can actually make you more productive and fulfilled.
It's like they say sometimes you need to slow down to speed up. Stillness helps you tap into creativity and wisdom. It's about trusting that the answers will come when you make space for them.
So we've talked about that feeling of emptiness that can come with success, the importance of self-acceptance, and the power of stillness. But this whole journey of self-discovery can feel pretty overwhelming. What advice does the expert give for navigating all that?
That's a great question, and it leads to another big idea from the expert. They talk about connecting with your heart, tapping into that inner wisdom that goes beyond logic and reason.
Like trusting your gut, that inner compass that points you in the right direction. But how do you actually access that inner wisdom?
That's what we're going to explore in the last part of our deep dive. The expert shares some really practical tips for cultivating presence, connecting with your heart, and living a life that's true to you.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive. And I'm really curious to hear more about what the expert says about connecting with our hearts and, living more authentically.
Yeah, well, the expert is so open about their own journey. They talk about struggling with anxiety and that pull towards always being busy, even while they're advocating for peace and presence. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think that's what makes their insights so relatable. They're not talking down to us, they're right there with us, figuring things out as they go.
Exactly. It makes their message more powerful, right? Because it's like, hey, this is a journey. We all have ups and downs, moments of clarity, and then moments of doubt.
Yeah, they even admit to still feeling fear sometimes,
Yeah.
even after achieving a level of success that many people would dream of.
It just shows you that fear is a natural part of life. It might not ever go away completely, but we can learn to look at it differently, not as an enemy, but as a sign that we're growing, pushing ourselves.
So it's like fear can be a good thing, like a sign that we're on the right track, moving towards something important.
Yeah, I think so. And that's where self-awareness comes in. The expert talks a lot about how instead of trying to change or hide the parts of ourselves we don't like, we can learn to accept them, even embrace them as part of who we are.
Right, like those parts of us we think are negative. They're actually
Mhm.
part of what makes us unique. Not something to be ashamed of, but something to understand and work with.
Exactly. They even talk about learning to channel their own ego, that desire for achievement and recognition into creating something that's both fulfilling and helpful to others. It's like every part of us has a purpose.
Okay, so how do we actually put this into practice? How do we get better at self-awareness and make choices that are more aligned with who we are?
Well, the expert suggests starting small, like with daily practices. Spending a few minutes each morning just thinking about your thoughts and feelings, noticing any patterns.
So just creating a space for quiet, a pause in the middle of all the craziness to check in with yourself and ask, what do I need right now?
Yeah, and as you get more in tune with what's going on inside, you can start making choices that feel right for you. Like when the expert decided to delete Instagram for a whole month, they realized all that scrolling was taking them away from the present moment.
Yeah, that's a great example of setting boundaries, right?
Right.
Recognizing when something's not serving you and making a change.
And the amazing thing is they actually found that by being more present, connecting with their heart, and spending time in silence, they became more clear-headed, effective, and even more creative.
That's amazing. It seems counterintuitive, but it makes sense when you think about it. We're always told to be busy, to hustle. But the expert's experience shows that slowing down, disconnecting from all the noise, can actually be super powerful.
Right. Like that saying, sometimes you need to slow down to speed up. Stillness helps us access our creativity and wisdom. It's about trusting that the answers will come if we give them space.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the big takeaways for our listeners?
I think the biggest one is self-awareness. Taking the time to really get to know yourself, your motivations, what you really want deep down. It's a journey, not a destination, and it's okay to embrace the messiness of being human.
And remembering that we don't have to do it alone. The expert even talks about asking for help, letting go of the need to be perfect, and allowing others to support us.
In a world that's all about being busy and successful, the expert's message is really important. It's a reminder that slowing down, connecting with ourselves, and being present are actually key to living a fulfilling life.
So as we leave this deep dive, here's a final thought to ponder. What's that creative spark inside you just waiting to be ignited by a moment of stillness and self-reflection? What would it look like to embrace every part of yourself and let your unique brilliance shine through?
Maybe try that 5 minutes of daily self-awareness that the expert talked about. Or simply take a few deep breaths and ask yourself, what do I really need right now? Whatever it is, I hope this deep dive inspires you to start your own journey of self-discovery and create a life that's both fulfilling for you and makes a difference in the world.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep shining.